Hello. Welcome everybody to the Win Divisible Get Out the Vote Boot Camp. My name is Raquel Jackson Stone. I am the Senior Training Associate for the Midwest. On off camera right now, but on screen is my colleague Lori Saltfight. She's the Senior Training Associate for the West Coast. And on behalf of all of the Indivisible staff and our guests who are here, part of making this event happen, thank you so much. And really thank all of you for showing up today. Whether you have been with Indivisible from the beginning, have never heard of us before, or if you've been organizing even before Indivisible was around, we're really glad that you're here today. GOTV means get out the vote. Today is focused on what we need to do to get out the vote, or rather, get in the vote if you're voting by mail. Before we get started, please take this chance to introduce yourself in the chat box. Use the stage chat box so we can all see who's here by typing your name, your Indivisible group, if you have one, and the city and the state that you're calling in from today. As you can see, we have wonderful ASL interpretation for today. If you need this, please double click the window with the interpreter to make it bigger and easier to follow along. All of the main stage events where we are right now will have interpretation, as well as one of the sessions called How to Host a GOTV Event. Welcome everyone joining us on Facebook as well. If you want to join us here in Hopin for the sessions to come, we will drop a link right now in the chat box so that you can join. And it will bring you directly into Hopin. Now, before we get into the content, I just want to explain how Hopin actually works, since this is a new platform for us even. We just got it a few months ago. So first, it works best on Google Chrome and with a really strong internet connection. Most problems can be solved the low-tech way by refreshing your browser. And we do have a tech help session that's open all day if you do need more technical assistance than that. We also have an email. It's called traininghelp@indivisible.org. If for some reason you can't even get into the session. Now you may be asking, how do I find this tech help place that you talk about? Well, if you look to the left side of your screen, you will see a vertical toolbar. At the very top is a little house icon that's labeled reception. So this page, it's where you landed on. It has a lot of information for today, like the schedule. It also has a link to some tech help documents, as well as that email address that I just mentioned. And right below that is a little camera icon that says stage. That's where we are right now. And following that, it's the icon called session. It almost looks like three people or maybe a crown. But that's where you'll find the tech booth and all of the other content sessions for today. Now, on the other side of your screen, you will see the words chat, poll, and people. If you click on chat, it will bring you to the chat box. Now, there are a few different chat boxes all side by side, and this can be a bit confusing. So one is for the event, which goes to everyone in the entire event. There will always be an event chat. So use this when you want to talk to everybody or broadcast something widely. The other chat box is specific to what you are watching and only send messages to people who are watching the same thing. So right now it'll say stage, but later it'll say session. So just remember that event is for everyone, and the other chat is more private and can only be seen by people who are saying the same thing that you're saying. Going back up to the top of that section with those three words, the next one is poll. when we launch a poll, you will be able to participate there. There are only a few sessions that are using this poll feature, so you will be directed to take a poll, and that's where you need to go. The last tab up there is People. You can see a list of everyone in attendance, though you really don't need to pay much attention to that. We have a time later on in the evening where folks can actually network and connect one-on-one. So don't worry about that People tab. Alrighty, so I think that's every section in Hopin. And if you still need help, finding where to go or what to do, please go to that tech help session. And that icon, like we just talked about, is under, it's on that left side of your screen. So we are right now exactly a month away from Election Day. And the stakes are really high. I've only lived a little bit of my life so far, but this moment feels really heavy and in a scary way that I really just haven't experienced before. It kind of feels like the weight of history on my shoulders. And I feel like I either have to take action or be crushed underneath it. I imagine some of you out there can understand the way I'm feeling and the intensity of this moment. We're facing a few different crises that really hit to the heart of our American democratic society. We're seeing civil disobedience in response to police killing and violence in Black and POC communities. We are facing a global pandemic, which has led to hundreds of thousands of deaths without clear guidance on how to protect ourselves and a lot of fear. We're also facing severe threats to our my fundamental reproductive rights, all of our voting rights, environmental right to clean air and water, and just the human right to healthcare, with the Supreme Court nominations looming over us. When we really start to build a list, it can feel overwhelming. But that's why I'm really glad that you're here tonight and actually taking action, doing your part to help create the inclusive, united democracy we all dream of, instead of the exclusionary, divided, and broken democracy which we're a part of right now. While we do what we can to address the crisis in the Supreme Court, the Senate, and the White House, and in our own local and state governments, the most important thing is to make sure everyone votes on November 3rd, or at least by November 3rd. Shout out early voting. This election is so important because it will determine the trajectory of our nation in serious and irreversible ways. We will be fighting the impacts of the last 4 years of Trump for generations to come, no matter the outcome of November. So getting out the vote is the most important thing we can do right now to protect our democracy and protect our trajectory towards justice. Because I don't know what another 4 years will bring, but I'm not willing to find out. But fear-mongering is not what we do. That's their game. We know we are better than the worst of us. We lead with our values, and we'll focus over the next few weeks to make sure that we turn out everyone and make sure our voices are heard in November. I will quickly go over the agenda before I kick it off to Lori to take us into a self-care, just reminding us why that's important and why that's important to build that into a part of our practice. As I just mentioned, that list can be very overwhelming. So after Lori talks about self-care, we will go into communicating across lines of difference right here, where you will have, and then after that, you will have a choice of breakout sessions. For those of us joining for the first time, you should go to Countering Disinformation, where the Indivisible Truth Brigade will teach us how to counter disinformation as we see it in our communities and on our social media feeds. For group leaders or those who want to host their own events, attend the How to Host a GOTV event. The name's pretty self-explanatory. And finally, you can talk to two of the Indivisible organizers if you want to at the Ask an Organizer session. After those sessions, we will have a special guest. Abby Jacobson will welcome us back from the sessions before we go into Indivisible strategy for GOTV. And then we'll break down what will happen after Election Day. And we will close out with inspirational words and phone banking. I'm really excited for today. I'm so glad you all are here. And without further ado, I will kick it over to Lori.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Raquel, for those inspiring words and just the reminders of why we're all here. Many of us came to this work following the awful news of the 2016 election, and we know too that the problem started before then. And we've been in a collective struggle since then to put us on a fair and equitable path for all. The struggle and the work has been so encompassing, laden with racial and environmental justice, together with a clear need for systemic change, that we just know this sheer amount of bad news and information has diminished our ability to pay attention to what is valuable information, what is not valuable information. Yet you and I are often called upon to be the helpers in our communities and are looked upon as those who have the answers. With all of that, you know, it's been challenging. So I wanted to offer a little bit of guidance on some self-care. So let's see if I can chew gum and walk at the same time and share my screen here. Just give me a second. Okay, so here we go. So if you'd like to see my screen a little bit larger, go ahead and double click on it. So that'll be what takes up most of your screen. Just give me a second while it's loading. It looks like it's taking a minute to, oh goodness, let's see. Why is it doing that? Oh, because I clicked share, not present. Okay, give me a second here. Here we go. All right. So I don't know about you, but I often feel like the person in this illustration. Let's get back to that slide. There we go. I'm really honored to be here with you today and to acknowledge your tireless work for justice, making sure that our elected officials know what's right for our country, and the 13 million plus digital voter contacts that Indivisibles have made since our first weeks of action. That's really awesome, and your work is so appreciated, and we're just so tired though, and we've come to a place where we may look and feel like the person in this illustration. In a recent article that I read called "Your Surge Capacity is Depleted, It's Why You Feel Awful," I was especially struck with the part that pointed out because our culture is so solution-oriented, it's difficult to come to terms when faced with problems that have no clear, immediate solutions. For example, people are traumatized by everything that COVID has brought and the atrocities experienced by people of color. The losses that we've experienced have us in a continual cycle of grief with no apparent end in sight. It's obvious that to keep going, many of us need guidance and tools. During a conversation with Brian Shears, a UCLA-based psychologist who has worked throughout the summer and now into the fall with Indivisible group leaders in a group they call Guardians of Compassion, he helped me understand that we're in a cycle of trauma and grief. They gather once a week to better understand the basic principles of mindfulness, developing a meditation practice, and applying those principles in their daily life in an ongoing basis. I told him about our boot camp today, and we wanted to start with some self-care, as I knew that there's so much that's being asked of you all, and that you are carrying a large burden. He recommended in the short period of time that we do an activity that can be based and used to help with stress during these challenging times. Before I delve into that mindfulness exercise for you all to have in your back pocket, I'd like to do a little surveying about the group or the community that we have here today. So if you slide over to, hold on one sec. Let me back up just a second here. My mouse is going crazy. And just to give us some context about mindfulness, it's the connecting between the bridge of our mind and the present moment, the bridge that's between those two things. So to get a little bit of context for our community, I'd like you to move over to that chat box on the right there and click on the tab that says polls. If you're comfortable in taking part in surveying how our community is doing, please answer the next 3 questions in the polls, and I will start those polls up in just a sec. Like I said, I'm trying to chew gum and walk at the same time here. So there are the questions, and if you go down to the poll, over to the polls, I'm going to start them right now. There are 3 of them. So you might need to toggle out of polls and then come back to see the 3 of them there. But go ahead, please, and answer those polls as honestly as you can, and also know that these are anonymous. So as you are answering the questions there, you can see how you and others in our community here are answering them, and it's kind of interesting to see that we're where we are. I'll give you another 10 seconds or so to take part in those polls. So it's interesting to see that about half of you have made self-care a habit. That's awesome. And the other half, it's challenging. And I have to admit that I feel guilty sometimes when I'm not working like the long hours that I know some of my colleagues do. I mean, the last few weeks I have worked more than 40 hours, but I know some of my colleagues have been doing that for months. And while I try to get enough sleep and exercise regularly, it doesn't always happen like I want it to. So thank you for taking a moment to answer those questions. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to back up here. My slides just kind of want to go ahead without me even telling them. And I'd like to spend the next 2 or 3 minutes doing a mindfulness activity with you, a way that we can use mindfulness in a way that helps you separate your thoughts from what's going on in your body. Okay, so please bear with me, and let's take the next 2 or 3 minutes to do that. So in this moment, try to bring your awareness to what you were doing, thinking, and sensing. So find a comfortable seat. I'm sure you're already in a seat, but get a little more comfortable and relax in that situation that you're sitting in, but have some intention in your posture, be sitting up kind of straight. And if you'd like, close your eyes or gently focus on one thing, either across the room or right in front of you, kind of in a gentle sort of way. What thoughts come into your mind? What feelings? Give them your attention and acknowledge these natural experiences, and then just let them pass. Don't sit with them very long, just let them pass. Attune yourself to who you are and your current state. Right now, your goal is to become aware of your breath. How does your body move with each breath in and out? How does your chest and your abdomen rise and fall as you let air in and let air out? Feel how your belly pushes in and out, and how your lungs expand and contract. Find the pattern of your breath and anchor yourself to that present with this awareness of your breath for 6 breaths in and out, or for about a minute. I'm going to be quiet for the next minute and let you just listen to your breath in and out. Okay. Let your awareness spread outward, first to your body and then to your surroundings. What thoughts come into your mind? Acknowledge them briefly, but then come back to your breath, focusing the in and out of your breath. Open your eyes or expand your soft gaze that you had on an object. What physical sensations are you experiencing? Note feelings like tightness, aches, or lightness, and then let go of those too. Keeping your mind, body as a whole, as a vessel for your inner self, always going back to the breath. Expand your awareness outward to your surroundings even further. Bring your attention to what is in front of you. What colors, shapes, and textures do you notice? Be present in this moment and acknowledge and be aware of your surroundings. Okay, so that was called Step Out of Your Autopilot. And like I said, it was a way for you to help separate your thoughts from what's going on in your body. I'd like to encourage you to make a self-care plan for yourself and possibly extend that to include sharing those ideas with your group members as well. It could include an exploration of mindfulness, like a deeper one. You could take time to do some journaling. You could put together a happiness calendar or have a look at the monthly calendar that Greater Good puts together. And I have some resources for you at the end here so you can connect to Greater Good. You could read the article that I talked about, your surge capacity is depleted, and look for other articles that are around the same kind of topic. And you could find an online course like The Aligned Mind, like the one at UCLA that Brian teaches, and maybe join a group like that. I've joined that group recently, and it's been really nice to like wind my week down. It's on Friday afternoons. So that document that I mentioned, where all of these resources, the autopilot mindfulness that I just went through, the reading, etc., that is being posted in the chat right now. So it's just a short document that has all those things that I talked about. So I want to leave you with just the notion of being well and taking care of yourselves, taking care of your wonderful selves. And so up next, we'll be joining some of my colleagues here in a few minutes for communicating across lines of differences. It starts in like 2 or 3 minutes if you want to go grab a quick drink, and then come right back. Thank you.
Hello, friends. Just getting set up. Hello, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. For those who are getting some water, like Lori said, water is very, very important. Just waiting for my colleague Nora Sharp to join us on stage, and then we will get started with our next piece of content called Communicating Across Lines of Difference. Wonderful. Here's Nora. Hello, Nora.
Hello. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lori. I know she's gone off stage, but still here in presence, you know, even though we're all virtual, we're all still here together. It is really important to take care of ourselves and our communities so we can continue to do the hard work of building inclusive and anti-racist democracy. And to that end, we are going to get started now with our first training. Woo! So for those watching the Facebook live stream, thank you so much for joining. Please share the live stream, but also come join us in Hopin. We would really, really appreciate it. So let's get started. Like I said, Nora Sharp will be able to introduce herself in just a hot second, but she is the Senior Training Associate for the East Coast. Nora, go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much, Raquel, and everybody. Thank you for being here. Yeah, we're really glad that y'all could join us for this training on communicating across lines of difference. Welcome to those who are on Hopin, those of us who are joining us on Facebook Live, those who might watch a recording of this in the future. Thank you all so much for being here. And just as a quick reminder for those on Hopin, if you'd like to expand either the slides that we're going to be sharing or the video of our wonderful ASL interpreter, Josh, you can simply double click on that rectangle and it will expand to be the largest one. And actually, I'm so sorry, I just want to double check, Raquel, regarding the screen share. I am not able to pull that up at this moment.
Oh, no problem. Let me see.
Sorry.
If I got it. No problem. Let me just pull that up.
Thanks, everyone, for your patience.
So many windows and so many screens. Okay. We should be good to go.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. So yeah, we're here today for a number of reasons. The Trump administration, as we all know, has been an era of many layered crises and harms that have only intensified as we race toward Election Day 2020. And to name only a few most recent affronts, I'm sure a lot of us are infuriated at the hypocrisy of the Republicans in their attempt to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court and their willingness to put politics and personal ideology before the good of the country. And as well, many of us are also likely grieving and furious as well about the recent decision out of Kentucky that the police officers who killed Breonna Taylor will not be brought to justice, which is only the latest in a history of failures to bring justice in cases of state violence against Black people. And of course, the US recently passed the 200,000 deaths from COVID-19. And many of us are mourning lost family and friends and community members, strangers, while others are still experiencing the impacts of long-term illness from COVID. So just want to acknowledge whatever is affecting you personally today. We honor where you're coming from and are grateful for you channeling that motivation into action. And we're also here today because this is the final stretch. We're really about to hit the core get out the vote portion of the electoral cycle. Voting has already started. Millions of ballots have already been cast. But our work for the month ahead is to chase down all the ballots that haven't been cast yet and make sure voters get them in safely and securely. So our GOTV work that we've already been doing, that we're going to be continuing to do over the coming month, involves reaching out to the entire Democratic base, even those who have not voted in a while. So this means we're going to be talking to hundreds of people over phone and via text. And because we don't know anything to an individual about the person we're speaking to in that moment, it's really important to go into our direct voter contact with respect and with an open mind, and with a practice of rigorous cultural competence. So that's what we're really kind of getting into today. So just a couple of pieces about the agenda and some norms for this space. First, please do as best as you can to limit distractions. If you're able to close extra tabs on your computer or silence your cell phone, that's great. We know we're all from home in a lot of cases these days, but that can just help focus on the materials at hand. And second, speaking of materials, the materials from this Windivisible weekend are going to be available for you to return to and share with your Indivisible group or with others around you later on. So just know that this isn't the last moment to access this content. And then finally, if any discomfort arises during the training today, we encourage you to just sit with that discomfort without reacting to it right away. Discomfort can be a really beneficial part of learning, so just stay with us. We'll stay with you, you stay with us. And we also encourage you to honor and acknowledge wherever you are in the journey and process of developing skills to communicate effectively across lines of difference. If something is new to you, now is a great time to learn it. And if something feels kind of familiar or old hat, shout out to that as well. And then just to briefly review the agenda, we're going to start off talking about overall best practices for communicating across lines of difference that apply both in general and in direct voter contact, as well as what to do when you mess up. And then we'll go into some example scenarios and kind of decide together what's the best course of action in scenarios that might take place in texting or phone banking. And then finally, we'll close with some recommendations for how to take care of yourself, how to deepen your awareness, and commit to building an inclusive movement, not only through November, but beyond. And then before all that, I'm just going to hand it to Raquel to get us formally started with some basic terms.
Thank you so much, Nora. So let's briefly ground ourselves in why this work is so important right now in particular. Like Nora just said, I'm sure we're all feeling there's a lot of stuff going on right now. It's so important that we learn how to speak to each other, not just to make sure that people vote, but to start to really build and expand our communities, start to heal some of the division that's honestly been around for the past decade, as far as I can remember, but for sure the past 4 years. What we're talking about when we say communicating across lines of difference is that acknowledging that we all come to our interactions with a set of identities and cultural lenses that really shape our communication and sometimes our assumptions about others. Communicating across lines of difference simply means having a conversation or an interaction with someone who is bringing other identities or cultural lenses to that conversation. In order to have these conversations respectfully and to avoid causing harm, it takes some effort and some real intentionality to develop a rigorous cultural competency. We have to change ourselves and our practices to make sure we are not perpetuating the same injustices that brought a lot of people to this training today and even to the work in general. And particularly in this moment of overlapping crises, we need to make sure that our language isn't what's dividing us. Continual failing of the justice system, and honestly, because it's so ingrained in our society, there are a lot of words and sort of colloquial phrases that have meanings that we no longer recognize, but are really based in some harmful stuff. So it can even be as simple as that. It's almost become cliche to say it at this point, but I'm going to say it again. It's really one of those moments where we have to be the change we want to see. So we have to develop self-awareness about our own identities and cultural lenses, know what they are, so that we can make sure we're not perpetuating harmful things that might be buried unchecked. We also have to get to know the prejudices and implicit biases we might unconsciously or that we consciously or subconsciously hold about those who are different from us. This self-awareness has to be an ongoing practice. We really have the wrong mindset if we think we're going to be able to learn a few tips or appropriate pieces of language and just be done with it. Rather, we have to assume that we'll make mistakes in the future and really look forward to learning from those mistakes. We also have to stay open to always learning new things about what could and could be harmful, and best practices for communicating and acting respectfully and appropriately. It's kind of like that old saying, the more you know. It's a process, so get excited about it. So at this point, you might be thinking, why does this matter for the election cycle? Like, aren't we all just here to fight the Trump agenda? Like, that's really what matters. And yes, of course, you're right. That absolutely matters. We all really need Trump out of office at this point, and we need to vote him out of office in November. But at the same time, the Democratic base is incredibly diverse, so we really can't just make blanket assumptions like that. So here's a brief rundown of who makes up the Democratic base. So we have Black voters, in particular Black women, make up the core of the Democratic Party. We also have liberals and party loyalists and some Latinx and Asian voters. Of course, these categories overlap and intersect, just like systems of oppression, and we're not using this to sort of categorize or typecast anyone at all, if that's the wrong impression to get from this slide. But thinking about some numbers to further sort of understand the gravity of this breakdown, in the 2018 election, following percentages of votes went to Democrats. So 96% of Black voters voted for Democrats, 71% of Latinx voters, 71% of Asian voters. Incidentally, it was a pretty large jump from 2016. And 61% of Native American voters. And by contrast, less than half of white voters voted Democratic in 2018, only 44%. So again, we bring this up really to emphasize that when we're phone banking and texting with indivisible this year, we're going to be calling people who have a high likelihood of supporting our candidate, which means we're going to be calling a diverse, multiracial base. And that's just speaking specifically about race. Our base is also diverse in the intersection of gender, ability, class, and more that we don't have time to get into today, but are all so valuable and important and worth digging into. The point is, if we want to have authentic, impactful, memorable conversations that really drive people to the polls, we need to be comfortable talking with people whether or not they share our identities. We have to make sure that we aren't causing harm, because you never know where people are, especially in this really charged moment that we're in right now. Don't know how they're processing the world around them, don't know how they feel about a certain political topic or not. So have to keep all this in mind, just to develop that practice of building self-awareness and really being intentional with your language. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Nora, who will walk through some best practices and what to do when you mess up, because it's going to happen.
Great. Thank you so much, Raquel. Yeah, so we're just going to start off with some best practices, and in particular, 3 core concepts, which are to recognize how little you know, to think about impact over intent, and then to consider that access benefits everyone. So first off, recognizing how little you know. So as Raquel just covered so helpfully, we do know broadly who makes up the Democratic base, and we know the broad voting patterns of people that we're contacting over phone and via text. But when we're communicating with an individual voter, we know almost nothing about that person's specific identities. We know their name, we know the state that they live in generally, but that's about it. So we really want to watch out for implicit bias, because even without visual markers, it's easy to subconsciously draw conclusions, based on names or accents or parts of the country that we might be calling into, and more. And those assumptions can lead us to cause harm or offense. So basic thing to start off with is don't make assumptions about who you are talking to. Next up is the concept of impact over intent. So a way to think about that in more words is that the impact of our actions needs to take primary consideration over whether or not we intended to cause harm. So a common analogy that I sometimes hear when people are talking about this concept is how we might respond if we stepped on somebody's toe. So if I stepped on someone's toe, the person knows that I didn't mean to do that on purpose. So it doesn't really help to say like, oh my God, please don't be mad at me, I didn't mean to. Instead, I'm just going to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that I smashed your toe. So I'm focusing on the impact of the fact that I stepped on the person's toe rather than on whether or not toe stepping itself was an accident. So in cases of larger harm, the same thing often holds true, that at least in that first moment of harm or in repairing that harm, it matters less whether we meant to be harmful than whether or not our actions were indeed harmful. And we have to take it as our responsibility to apologize, to try to repair, and to change our actions in the future to keep people safe. So, and to be clear as well, I don't want to make it sound as if unintentional harm and intentional harm are the same. So a lot of us might feel like if I do stamp the person's toe on purpose, we're probably going to look at that a little bit differently than when it is an accident. But rather that even the unintentional harms often still kind of require a shift from focusing on the intent to focusing on the impact. Okay, and then third is access benefits everyone. So many of you can probably think of an access support, and actually I invite you to think about that now, some kind of access support that wasn't created for your specific abilities, but that you still appreciate and find benefit from. So feel free to share examples like this in the chat. I'll just give one to kind of start us off, which is that even though I'm not hard of hearing, I always watch TV with closed captions on because it just kind of helps me keep up with what's going on and understand everything, even though I don't absolutely need that. Or if I'm writing public transit systems, I love looking at the signage that's in other languages because it just makes me more familiar with languages I'm a little bit familiar with, or maybe as well ones that I'm not as familiar with. So let me just take a second to look in the chat box here. Would love to see some examples that other people might be throwing in here. Let's see. Yeah, Braille and voice on elevators, ramps and cutouts in the pavement, elevators, once again, curb cuts. Yeah, a lot of simple things that we might even take for granted or not even realize are access points in the first place, but we're just used to having them. Yeah, providing tech help. Tech help is huge for unfamiliarity with different devices. Closed captioning as well. Posters about masks in multiple language, wide doorways, video descriptions, cordless keyboards, so many things that it might not even occur to us that that's creating access because so many of us appreciate it whether or not it was made specifically for us. So it's kind of just this shift from thinking about access as being only for a few people to access as being something that really makes a space or an experience just positive overall for everyone involved. Thank you all so much for those examples. I really appreciate the participation there. Okay, so, and then just to consider a direct voter contact example, it's really helpful when you're on the phone to speak slowly and clearly and not use a ton of unfamiliar jargon. And why is that? Well, if you're speaking to somebody who is hard of hearing or to someone whose first language isn't English, it might be especially important to speak slowly and clearly. But it's also going to be easier for everyone to understand you and keep up if you're speaking slowly and clearly and really giving space to your language. So if you find yourself when you're doing direct voter contact kind of adjusting your communication to be more accessible to a unique voter, just consider applying those shifts and tweaks to everyone and not just thinking about, I have to change my behavior in a narrow way, that really those shifts can be positive for everyone that you're communicating with because access benefits everyone. Okay, so we talked about impact over intent and some other concepts, but now we want to get a little bit more concrete. So what should you do and what should you not do if you end up causing harm or you offend someone? So let's start with the what not to do part, just to kind of get it out of the way. Like we said with impact over intent, it can be really easy to want to rush and just say, oh, I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to. See if you can avoid that in a lot of cases. There's no need to go into a long explanation of why you did something or what you actually meant. And while it can be easy to get defensive, we want to try to avoid that as well. Defensiveness a lot of the time only makes things worse. Okay, so let's talk about then what we can do when we mess up. So first off is do apologize and also keep it simple. Sometimes it can be helpful to watch out for over apologizing. Secondly, acknowledge that you did make a mistake and own it instead of explaining it or making excuses. Another thing that can be helpful is to process later, is how I put it, and to kind of skip oversharing your feelings. So just to say some more about that, if you feel genuinely bad about something that's happened, but you spend a lot of time telling the other person about how bad you feel right in that moment, that can end up making it the other person's responsibility to make you feel better in the moment. So they might end up rushing to say, oh, it's okay, and comforting you when they were the one who was just harmed, potentially. So it's really normal and healthy, of course, to want to process our feelings about having caused harm and process our feelings in general, to be frank. But it can be helpful to plan on kind of doing that on your own time or after the initial moment, perhaps after the phone call, rather than with a voter themselves as the audience. And next up is pay attention to cues. So if a person you're communicating with seems to want to end the conversation, or if by contrast they want to continue it and maybe even comment on what you said, just respond accordingly. So this is a good moment to mention that sometimes we think we've been offensive, but we might actually be overthinking it. And by making a really big deal out of it, out of a perceived mistake, when the person that we're talking to isn't really communicating that it's a big deal to them, that can once again kind of require more effort or more comfort on the part of that person than they really should have to give. And then last up is move on and move forward. So don't dwell on a harmful moment right when it's happening. Sometimes it can end up, like I said, kind of forcing that other person to dwell as well, and they might not want to. So finish a conversation, learn from the mistake, apply it to the next conversation. So you might be wondering, like, that all sounds great, but what does this actually look like in practice? So fortunately, that is what the next section is for. We've covered some best practices and a basic process, and now we're going to apply it to specific examples. And these are all example scenarios of how someone might encounter difference in their direct voter contact work, and then a range of responses the person might have in that interaction. So for each of the sample responses, we're going to invite you all to respond in the chat box which response seems most appropriate to you. There's going to be a little multiple choice function. Don't worry, we're not grading or anything like that, but just kind of keep it lively here. And then after we ask for your thoughts, we'll explain our recommendation and why we chose it. So as we're going through these examples, we definitely invite you to keep in mind that sometimes the misstep or the mistake or the error kind of starts almost internally as like a thought or a belief that's coming up before it manifests as behavior or as action. And those kind of thought missteps are worth noticing and trying to shift internally so that they don't lead to harmful action. So some of these examples will take the form of thoughts or beliefs that the sample texter or phone banker has, and sometimes separate from examples of actions that they might take as a result. So let's get into our examples here. So first up, for example, scenario 1, imagine that you're in the middle of a phone bank and someone picks up the phone. And following the script and the name of the voter listed, you say, "Hello, can I please speak with Elizabeth?" And next you hear kind of a pause, and then the person sighs and says, "That's not my name, but what are you calling about?" So then following the script, you say, "I'm a volunteer with Indivisible Action, and we're calling voters today about the upcoming election. Is this the right number for Elizabeth?" And the person says, "Right number, wrong name. My name is Eddie now." So what would be your response? Option A, you say, "I'm sorry, I had the wrong name, Eddie. I'm making a note so we can update our list from the public voter file. Thanks so much for picking up the phone and talking with me," and then you continue with the script. Option B is you say, "I'm sorry, I'm confused. I'm looking for an Elizabeth." And then C is, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you." And then you continue with the script. So let me give you all a second to let us know which option you would choose. Feel free to throw it in the chat box here on the main stage. Oh, I'm okay. Yes, the flood of many A's, a couple of, I think there's some other letters in there too, but it's hard to see. It's hard to see all of them. Okay, great. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you all for chiming in there. Appreciate it. Yeah, so real quick, I'll share with you what our thought is. But before we unpack these responses, I just want to share a little bit of context about this example to kind of just share where we were coming from in making it. So first of all, there's like all kinds of cases where somebody goes by a name that's not what's listed as the first name on the voter file. So somebody who goes by a nickname or a middle name, or maybe the names in their language or their culture are structured differently, something like that. So in this example, we're thinking of a particularly kind of heightened and potentially painful kind of wrong name usage, which is often referred to as dead naming. So dead naming happens, or that the term generally refers to when a transgender person goes by a different name than they were assigned at birth, but someone calls them by their birth assigned name, which is sometimes referred to as their dead name. So while one of us would have no way of knowing that a voter is trans going into the phone call, it's important that as soon as we are corrected, whether or not the person comes right out and describes their gender experience to us or not, to just make amends, use the name that they're asking for, and move forward respectfully. So with that context in mind, let's go back and unpack these responses. And yes, as a lot of people chimed in and said, we definitely recommend the first response, but let's just talk about why. The first response is ideal because our sample caller does apologize. They acknowledge the mistake, that they had the wrong name. They make a statement about how they're going to seek to prevent this in the future by updating the list, and they move forward respectfully. So the person has paid attention to cues in what the voter already said, and this led them to their response. In the second response, the caller is kind of failing to pick up on the cues that the voter isn't using the name listed. This is a good example of impact over intent. They're probably not intending to be offensive, but they're just maybe not listening with the kind of attention to cues in a way that's going to help them respond appropriately. And then in the third response, this one's kind of interesting because the caller seems kind of flustered or perhaps uncomfortable and is over apologizing in a way that might require the voter to comfort them. So this is better than not picking up on cues at all, but it definitely still has room for improvement. And you also might notice that all of these do include an apology, even though they're not all great responses. So that's just one of those good reminders that simply saying I'm sorry doesn't always help. You want to find the right amount of sorry or the right other things to say along with that. And then before we move on to the next example, I just want to share a quick related note about pronouns, which is that if you do find yourself using the wrong pronoun for a voter and the voter corrects you, you can take a similar course of action. Just correct yourself, apologize if that feels right, and move forward. And you can also default to the singular they when you don't know someone's pronouns as well, as a way of avoiding at least many cases of potential hurt. So, and I'm going to pass it over to Raquel for the next example.
Thank you, Nora. So in this scenario, we are phone banking, and we're calling someone on the phone who may be losing their hearing for a variety of reasons. So they seem really interested, but they've interrupted you many times already, just telling you that they cannot hear you. So what do? A, apologize. And then you start yelling the script as loud as you possibly can at the top of your lungs. B, you apologize for the issue and intentionally speak more slowly and clearly. Ask them a simple question to make sure they can understand you before you continue with the script. You also make a note that they are hard of hearing. Or C, apologize for the issue and offer to find someone else to speak with them without attempting to accommodate their hearing concerns. So please submit your answer in the chat box. Scrolling over now to see what we've got. All right, I see a lot of B's coming in. Fantastic, lots of B's. The B's are marching in. All righty, well, smart people that you are. B is absolutely the correct answer. First thing first, acknowledge what they said and find a way to accommodate their concern. And make a note of the accommodation that they need. In this instance, following the best practices of speaking slowly, and reading the script clearly was exactly what was needed.
It looks like we lost Raquel. Oh, there we go.
Hello, friends. Seems like we may have had a quick disruption in our broadcast.
We got you back.
Apologies. Get us just a quick moment to get our slides back up, as well as our other presenters. Thank you so much for hanging in there. All righty. Okay, so I'm going to keep going with the content, and we'll give our friends hopefully give our friends enough time and space to get back onto the broadcast. So we are talking about option C. It's always okay to recognize that you're not the best person for the conversation. Again, don't assume that they no longer want to speak with you. Just ask them politely if they would prefer to have someone else contact them, or another way of contacting them, which would be better. And collect their information so you actually can follow up with them. Now, option A is not the best option for a few reasons. First thing first, just never yell at someone over the phone. That's just not cool. And it actually kind of makes it harder to hear because of how phone works. I don't do physics, but from experience, it does not work very well. Very often, a simple shift is the solution to overcome the communication issue. And like we said, sometimes you're just going to mess up. Sometimes there is no answer, but it's all about intentionally building a practice so that, you know, you can get a little bit closer to being the best you that you possibly can be every time for other folks. Alrighty. Since Nora still has not made it back on screen yet, I will continue with example scenario number 3. Hope that they return soon. So in this scenario, you're texting a voter whose name is Mohammed, and Mohammed lives in Atlanta. So after the introductory text, that ends by asking, "Are you supporting Biden for president?" This Mohammed replies, "Why should I?" What is your response? So it looks like we have Nora back. Are you able to walk us through our responses, Nora?
Absolutely, yes. I actually didn't realize that I wasn't showing up, but yeah, I'm here. I can pick it back up. Great. So out of our possible responses, the first option is you search the term race in the list of pre-written responses and select and send a response that describes how Democrats' platforms are going to benefit communities of color. And this is the first time in your texting shifts that you've used this response. Option B is the person seems rude and unfriendly to you, so you follow the texting workflow pathway for voters who are opposed. And then option C, you follow the texting workflow pathway for voters who are undecided, selecting and sending a standard pre-written response that describes in general how the Trump agenda has been harmful to Georgians, and then asks what the voter cares about this election season. So let's give a minute for folks to chime in with their choices. Okay, I am seeing C's going off the bat. And yes, I'm going to agree with you all. The response we want to go with is C, but why? So the texter who's making the first choice might be assuming that the voter they're contacting is possibly Arab or Black based on the voter's name and the place where they live, or maybe the intersection of the two or something else. So sending this response might not end up being harmful, and the voter might very well care and probably ought to care about how democratic platforms would benefit communities of color, but it's worth being skeptical about this choice if it's based on an assumption rather than on something the voter has expressed their values about. And if the voter is indeed a person of color but hasn't said so explicitly, this response could come off as pandering or as implying that the texter knows what's best for the voter. And I think what's most telling about this example is that it's the first time that the texter has used this response. So all voters should be invested in electoral impacts on communities of color. And if the texter is only finding and using this pre-written text because of an assumption about the race of the voter, that demonstrates a set of attitudes about race and what we maybe think people care about hearing based on their race that are problematic and likely to be even more damaging outside of texting. And then to unpack the second response, the texter is reading tone into a text message here when there isn't nearly enough information to make that read. And more importantly, if they're making assumptions about the person's race based on their name and location, that tone perception falls in line with racist stereotypes of people of color being aggressive or unfriendly. So the voters, or rather the texter's choice to mark the person opposed is not only inaccurate, we don't know that they're opposed yet, and so that's gonna give inaccurate data to the campaign, to our texting campaign, and it's not fair to the voter. And let alone, once again, it's a pattern of thinking that's likely to be even more harmful in other life situations beyond texting. So we would recommend the final response. This texter is following the appropriate texting workflow based on the response that they've received from the voter. And do remember that you can always ask moderators for assistance or for guidance for help if you're not sure. They're there to help you in our texting channels in Slack. And I'm going to send it back to Raquel for the next example.
Thank you. So in this instance, you get on the phone with someone who has a very, very strong accent. You start trying to speak with them, but you are just unable to understand them to the point where you can't even tell if they're supportive or not. You can't even tell if it's the right name. So what do? A, apologize and acknowledge you're having trouble hearing them and just read the script through. You perceive that maybe Spanish is their first language. So you put down the same responses as other people you spoke to that evening with similar assumed Latinx backgrounds. B, you apologize and acknowledge you're having trouble understanding them. You ask a few simple questions to make sure they can understand you so that you can try to, understand what they're saying. If you know the answer is going to be yes, try to understand what their yes sounds like, stuff like that. Though even with this, you can't understand them, but it seems like they can understand you pretty well. So you continue with the script, just pausing where the script tells you to pause for them to respond, but you don't acknowledge their responses because you can't understand them. So at the end of the conversation, you label them as a supporter and move on after you finish reading the script. Option C, apologize and acknowledge that you're having trouble understanding them. You ask them a few simple questions to see if they can understand you, see if you can understand them a little bit better, but you're still unable to understand their response. You offer to find someone who can follow up with them and confirm their information so that someone can appropriately follow up. So please submit your answer. Seeing some C's roll in. Lots of C's. Lots of C's. You guessed it. The correct answer is definitely C. While B is almost correct, the reason why C works, the choice to continue with the script is where B went wrong. If you can't understand the person, you won't be able to learn anything about them. And the conversation will honestly just be a waste of time. Even if they were a supporter, you don't know because you can't understand them. Option B also assumes information about this voter, though the voter has not been able to confirm any of that information because you can't understand them. Option C is what we're really going with. By making an offer to find someone who can better accommodate them. I want to make a note about offer C, to remember to offer the accommodation. Don't assume that they want it. The voter on the other end might be able to understand you fine and might be perfectly willing just to listen to what you're saying. So just follow the best practices and be friendly and polite. Now, option A is, in my opinion, very problematic. Not only did they not try to adjust their behavior to accommodate the issue, they made an assumption about the voter and applied information based on that assumption. This isn't helpful information for the campaign. Resist this at all attempts, just like Nora was talking about above. And when you acknowledge there might be something leaning that way, just try to nip that in the bud, try to adjust your behavior. There's really no room for operating on assumptions, especially in a moment like this when we really need accurate information from people. And also it can go to just confirm some harmful assumptions and harmful stereotypes that we carry about other people. Another note about this example is to take notes about the people you're speaking to. There is an option when we phone bank, but make a note that there is a language barrier. Even better if you confirm that English is a second language, confirm what their first language is so you can actually find someone to connect with them appropriately. And in all of our voter outreach platforms, there are the ability to take notes. So you can really build up an accurate file and really communicate the best way possible with this voter the next time we call them. So now we'll kick it off to Nora for example number 5.
Thank you, Raquel. So in this next example, imagine you're in the middle of a phone bank calling into South Carolina when a voter named Arnold picks up. And from the hello and the conversation, you notice that Arnold has a Southern accent, and we'll just imagine that's an accent that you did not grow up around. So what's happening for you internally while you're talking to Arnold? Option A, you're thinking, I wonder if this person even votes. Option B, you're listening carefully to gather as much information as you can about what Arnold is saying and what Arnold cares about. Or option C, you're thinking about how fortunate it is that voters where you live are making calls to people like Arnold. And I'll give folks a second to respond in the chat. Okay, and the flood of Bs comes in, and I'll just go ahead and say right away, we agree with you. So once again, we'll just unpack our responses quickly. So the first internal reaction might happen for someone who is holding assumptions about voters in the South, including possibly about class experience, about voter self-awareness, or ability to think for oneself. So that person in that example is carrying out these assumptions in a way that is disrespectful and could lead them to cause harm, even if right now on this phone call, they aren't asking Arnold, do you even vote, or something that is similarly overt. The second reaction I'd say is roughly what we're working towards. So Arnold is a voter, and our job is to devote our full energy to listening to what they're communicating. And then the third internal reaction might not seem problematic at first glance, but it seems to hold some condescension and maybe a bit of savior mentality. People from the northern US or from coastal cities or other particular areas of the United States or any intersection of those sometimes get into problematic territory of looking down on folks in typically red or rural parts of the country and thinking that they know what's best for folks in these regions. So this condescension, even if it's not intentional, is unnecessary and inappropriate. So Arnold's a voter with their own autonomy and agency. And in the moment of this call, we want to get interested in and invested in Arnold. So this example is also a moment to point out that sometimes we might notice those prejudiced or problematic thoughts that might not yet be leading to action, kind of like we brought up earlier in this training. So just noticing our thoughts and how they reflect prejudiced conditioning is a really great place to start building self-awareness and moving ourselves towards different and equitable beliefs. And then Raquel is going to take it back for the last example.
All right. Thank you, Nora. So let's say you're participating in a GeoTV text bank, contacting voters in Florida. Following the workflow, You send a text message that reads, "How will you vote this year? By mail, through early voting, or on election day?" The person you're texting responds, "I can't vote. I have a felony on my record." What should be your response? You choose the recommended reply for previously incarcerated and edit the response to provide the information to check the rules based on their states, and really, just convey a sense of empathy for their situation, for the violation of their civil liberties. Option B, you write back, "Wow, I'm so sorry to hear that." And then you tell them a story about how the criminal justice system has affected your life. See? You ask the text moderators for help, but then never follow up with a reply. So please submit your answer. Seeing some A's roll in. Alrighty. Man, if we were grading this, y'all would be on fire. The correct answer is for sure A. People with felony convictions and previously incarcerated people can vote in some states, including recently Florida, where this hypothetical voter lives. Some voters might not know that, might not know all of the rules around how to even get this right back, speaking specifically of Florida. So you can share this information appropriately, even while offering empathy about their situation and their experience. Option B might be tempting, but your attempt to relate doesn't help the voter in any way and almost gets to being more cathartic for you than actually the goal of contacting and helping this voter like we're trying to do to get out all the votes in November. So while your attempt to connect and build that empathetic relationship is great, that's really not the right way to go about it. Just don't get so wrapped up in it that you forget the necessary information too, and why you're talking to this voter, which is to make sure their voice can be heard. C also starts out as a good option. Asking the moderators for help is always a good thing. The problem here is that the texter didn't follow up. Always make sure to follow up and send information with people. It's a rule for organizing and honestly just for life. So one other note for those of you volunteering on our texting program. It won't always be clear exactly which recommended reply to use in our texting program. If you don't know what to say, please ask for guidance in the texting questions channel in Slack. And if a voter is offended, confused, or brings up something sensitive, you can always edit the recommended reply to share some empathy, humanize your language, just make it connect to the conversation so it doesn't feel like they're texting a robot, because they're not. Sometimes they are. It's a fine balance between offering crucial information and not jumping the gun so fast that you leave out acknowledgement for their experience and that really just having a conversation with another human. So we've covered a lot today. I just want to finish up with a couple of notes. First, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We chose a small handful of very specific examples because specificity is often the best way to learn. We can't expect a handful of examples to cover all possibilities and to do all learning. Cultural competency is not a deck of cards, and we're not looking to put together a complete deck to finish our learning. Our job is actually to continually expand a range of differences that we are comfortable communicating across, rather than looking to get it done and be done. There is no place where you can get it. Along those lines, please keep in mind after today that communicating across difference has to be an ongoing practice of self-awareness. Practice paying attention to the language and tone you use and that you hear around yourself, even some colloquial phrases that are used, like a rule of thumb. That comes from wife beating. Didn't know that. Found out soon. Don't use that phrase anymore. Personally, not telling y'all what to do, but history is really important. Ask yourself, what are the words or expressions that I'm used to using? What do they actually mean? Where do they come from? It'll really reveal a lot about the beliefs that formed our society. And beyond that, we encourage the belief that correction is a gift. As much as we practice self-awareness, sometimes we learn from making mistakes or from learning about other people's mistakes. A lot of times we can't see our shortcomings and we need someone else to tell us about ourselves. So if someone points out to you that something you never thought about before is problematic, treat it as an opportunity to learn and grow, to do better, rather than as a condemnation or something to get defensive about. We also want to acknowledge that although we've focused a lot today on how to avoid causing harm or what to do when we cause harm, it's also entirely possible that you might feel hurt or harmed by something a voter says to you over the phone or over text. Especially for everyone here today who experiences marginalization, you should probably know what it's like to be on the receiving end of this kind of microaggressions in the example scenarios that we laid out. And even thinking back to the multiple crises that we're in right now, you never know where people are. So we encourage everyone, all of us doing voter contact, to take care of ourselves and really protect ourselves from harm while we're phone banking and texting. You know, thinking back to the self-care piece that Lori walked us through earlier. Make it a habit. So a couple of specifics on this front. You can always hang up the phone if someone is harming you. You can end a text conversation if someone texts slurs or harmful language to you. There is training in the text banking process about how to do this, but like there's a whole recommended reply for if someone's being rude and nasty. So we have things set up already. If you have a particularly hard conversation, just take a break. Leave your computer, drink a glass of water, tell a friend about what happened, or take whatever actions you know from experience can just help you feel safer. Next, the skills and practices we covered today don't have to stop with phone banking or texting. We'd like to call for one more moment of participation by asking, how can you see yourselves applying these practices in the rest of your organizing and other parts of your life? Give it a moment for folks to reply. I know this is much more than just typing a letter. Thank you. Yeah, they're rolling in now. We are almost out of time. Otherwise, I would acknowledge everyone who's responding right now. I'm going to move forward because we wanted to share some recommendations for further learning. First, Google is your friend. If something happens that makes you notice your own ignorance, it's literally never been easier in human history to research on your own how to do better or how to fill in the gaps in your knowledge. Don't ask a friend or acquaintance who holds the identity that you're ignorant about. Do your research, research what you're unfamiliar with, and consider processing with a friend who shares your identity if you need to work out something that's confusing or uncertain before going into a space where your ignorance might cause harm to marginalized folks. You need to practice. One of the best ways to expand our cultural competence and your comfort communicating across lines of difference is to do it often. Seek out inclusive community spaces where there are people who differ from you. Though watch out for tokenizing and fetishizing and social checklisting. It's not to try to get to know or befriend people who are different from you just so you can tell yourself that you're not a racist or pat yourself on the back. It's something else. It's about listening to what people say and believing them and really building those relationships. Next is to widen your feed. Expand the voices that you're talking to on a daily basis. Follow social media accounts, read news sources and books, watch media sources from a wide variety of race, gender, ability, citizenhood, geographic, and other experiences, so that you can avoid seeing groups of people whose identities you don't share as a monolith, and really diversify and nuance your own perspective about other people's experiences. And really just keep going, keep doing it. That's really what we need you all to do. And so in closing, thank you for coming. I really, really appreciate you getting into it and being ready to win Divisible with us, because we need to get out the vote. It's really important. We now have a 5-minute break. When we return, we will be in breakout sessions. So again, navigate to the sessions icon. There are 3 available. One is how to host a GOTV event. The other is countering disinformation. And the last one is the Ask the Organizer booth. The tech booth is still open, but please take these few minutes to go to the bathroom, drink some water. Drink some water is really important. And we will see you in the sessions starting at 4:25 p.m. Eastern. I did not switch that around for other time zones, and I apologize. And for folks on Facebook Live, please join us in Hopin so that you can be a part of these sessions. Otherwise, we will be back starting at 5:20. Thanks so much, everyone. And we will see you in just a few minutes in the breakout sessions. Bye-bye.